Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Tough Talks. Today we have Magda Reynolds, a psychological counselor at NICRO, who is going to talk about pop psychology versus actual psychology. Thank you, Magda, for making yourself available today. So, Magda, for our viewers, can you define what you mean by actual psychology and what you mean by pop psychology?
So actual psychology being defined as, the years of studying and research and everything that has gone into the actual field of psychology, things that we have an academic base for, that we have research for, that we have years of supported evidence for, versus then the psychology that has been popularized in the modern world, because we saw an upswing of people, engaging in the mental health discourse, which is good, but it also led to a bit of a tangent with regards to psychology itself.
Can you elaborate on what that looks like? Like, what are you seeing on social media that has led you to comment on this particular topic?
So on social media, we have seen a very large swing in terms of people engaging in mental health discourse, but they would be somebody, for example, let's say I have been diagnosed with depression and now I am giving advice to all the other people with depression. And while that can be very helpful and good as a support base, what is true for me won't necessarily be true for you in terms of treatment. So each case, even if it's the same diagnosis, is still very different. And then we also saw a rise in practitioners that haven't studied via the accepted or accredited channels, that maybe did various courses around the line, and that are now seeing people in a mental health capacity, either for counseling or, creating content in the mental health space, which can be very risky because, the training and the accreditation and the things of these programs are there for a reason.
So, Magda, can you unpack who is qualified to give advice on mental health issues in South Africa?
So in South Africa, we have the SAC-SSP, which holds all the social workers who are qualified, that can then give mental health advice to a certain extent. And then we also have the HPCSA, which is the Health Professions Council of South Africa, which holds registered counselors, psychologists, psychiatrists, doctors, all the medical professionals. And especially for the HPCSA, as that is my registration, so that is the one I can speak on. Once you get your degree, you still have to write the board exam, which you have to have 70% or above for to be able to pass and then receive your registration to be able to practice. We get monitored in terms of continuous professional development so that we are still learning and developing every year. We have set scopes of practice. So, for example, I know if somebody comes to me with symptoms of depression, I cannot make that diagnosis. I can tell them, listen, you exhibit quite a few of the symptoms of depression, but I'm going to be referring you on to either a clinical psychologist or a psychiatrist to make that call. I can support them in doing all these things. I can write referral letters. So each of us has a designated scope of practice, which we are also guided by.
Yeah. I find that there are a lot of people online who are presenting themselves to the public as coaches or wellness coaches. And can you just talk a bit about when people are referring to themselves as a life skills coach or a wellness coach, what are they talking about? What is that qualification? What background do they have? And what is their scope of practice?
Look, it may very well be that they've done some wellness courses or some counseling courses around the line. It may be that they are, somebody who has gone through quite a bit of adversity in life and is now speaking on the lessons that they've learned and coaching others through the same thing. But there is no registration category for that with the HPCSA. There's no registration for that. So yes, while it can have use to some people, and I know of people who have drawn quite a bit of motivation and everything from life coaches, wellness coaches, that type of thing. If you are looking to engage in serious counseling and actual psychology, then you need to look for a person who is registered with the actual boards.
So what could, you said more serious counseling, more serious psychological issues. So if someone was suffering from, let's say, trauma or depression or mental health issues, who would you recommend they go to?
They need to see either a registered counselor, a psychologist of any kind, or a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist would be mostly for medication, but to start off with, perhaps a registered counselor or a psychologist. Because while you can get support and motivation and other things from the professionals around, if you want to actually engage in the therapeutic process, you very much need to be mindful of the fact that there are certain standards of training, standards of care, scopes of practice, and things that are adhered to when a person is registered with either the SSC, SSP, or the HPCSA.
Okay. And also they do, if somebody had to lodge a complaint, they weren't happy about the service, or there was some form of malpractice or improper behavior, they can then make a report to those registration bodies who would then take action.
Yeah.
Okay. So if someone wasn't happy with the services of, let's say, a life skills coach or wellness coach, what would they be able to do about it?
If there is somebody that those people are registered with, they could potentially go there. But the thing is, the legislation doesn't make room for a lot that can be done, because the legislation is built around the SAC, SSP, and the HPCSA. So there is definitive actions that can be taken then against practitioners.
Okay. Right. So let's just recap for our viewers. Assessing the credibility of social media content. There is so much out there, and a lot of people speak with such confidence. They're drawing from maybe their own experience, and that can be very compelling content. Yeah. So how does someone who isn't that well informed about mental health and the registration bodies and the qualifications, if they were looking at content and they're getting some kind of advice, how would they be able to assess that this is advice worth taking seriously, or whether it's just information that they can review and then just, move on to the next information?
As mentioned, there is some good in having that support, having that community, things that wasn't available, where people with mental health concerns felt very alone and very stigmatized. And social media has broken that, but now we don't want it swinging so far the other way. So, for example, if you hear people on social media speaking about a trauma bond, which is something I hear quite often, a trauma bond in pop psychology seems to be when people are bonding around, you and I have experienced the same type of trauma, where in actuality, a trauma bond is I bonded to you. I had some form of dependence or attachment on you, and you're the one who was abusing me. That is how we then came together with this trauma bond. Gaslighting is another one that we hear quite frequently. Gaslighting is not when somebody lies to you. Gaslighting is an actual abuse tactic when somebody tries to influence your reality, your memory, where they try to convince you that, you are not right here. What you experienced didn't happen. They are trying to make you out like you are crazy. The other one that is quite popular is that you are being triggered. Being triggered doesn't mean that you are now comfortable or uncomfortable or annoyed. Being triggered means there is an actual increase in symptoms. It is something that trips your wires if you've had a traumatic experience or if something happened that leads to intense discomfort and something you can't just switch away, and that can also bring flashbacks and all the other symptoms of the trauma back. Intrusive thoughts is another one. You often see this little post of, I let my intrusive thoughts win. Your intrusive thoughts is not dyeing your hair pink or sticking your finger in a gel candle. Your intrusive thoughts is actually very much involuntary thoughts that you don't want around you from your trauma or nightmares or things that just come without you having any type of control over them, and they can be really scary. So what I would warn against is just have a look at, whether these words are being used properly. Narcissist is another big one. A narcissist is not somebody who's selfish. People are selfish. Some people are a lot more selfish than others. To be diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, there needs to be quite a few criteria met. And using these words loosely can really take away from the people who are actually having these experiences. So just be very mindful when you consume content as to potentially what the background of the person is that you're watching this content of, what the words are that they're using, how they are using these words, who they are describing, what they are describing. So just a bit of discernment that you can see, is this somebody that I can rely on in terms of support? Or is this something that I disregard completely? Or is it now time perhaps for me, by what I saw, that I should enroll for therapy myself?
I think because people are so bombarded with content, it becomes very difficult to apply a critical eye to what they're seeing. I would say that the bulk of what is available on social media is just entertainment. It's not meant to be taken seriously, even if it is being presented in a very authoritative, confident tone of voice. And some people are extremely convincing. It's entertainment. It's content meant to be consumed to generate likes, which has a monetary value attached to it. Whereas your more thoughtful, professional, engaged content tends not to get promoted by the algorithm, to give that phrase, because it's not easily consumed content. It's not maybe as entertaining or snappy as the other shorter content. And that leads to this distorted sense of what information is out there. Is it the information that's prevalent, or the information that you actually have to go and look for and apply your mind to and pay attention to what's being said? And unfortunately, we're seeing more of the former rather than the latter. But people think because it's so prevalent, I'm seeing people use these terms everywhere, this is now common, this is now how people are speaking. But it's just the louder voices, not necessarily the most educated voices, the most knowledgeable voices, or the voices that have the most value attached to them. And that's just my take on what's happening a lot on social media. What do you think about that?
No, absolutely. And I mean, there are some very good content creators, but there are, as you said, usually the ones that may have a good following, but not as good as, the more snappy and, just fun, popular content. Yes, yeah. But, mental health isn't entertaining. It's actually a very serious topic. And yes, while we can have fun with it, it has bounds, because this is something that causes real struggles for people. So, like I said, the community part of it is very important, because the isolation with mental health and the stigma is not good. The fact that the stigma has largely, been addressed by social media, and those are all very positive things. It's just we need to be very discerning in what we consume and then what we do with what we consume. And just because somebody has the same diagnosis as you doesn't mean their treatment would in any way be the same. Because even if the diagnosis is the same, how it's experienced, how it's treated, all of that is very different, because mental health just isn't one of those one-size-fits-all fields. You have to do it person by person.
All right, so that's some commentary on the challenges that we currently experience between actual psychology and pop psychology, which is much more popular, and just putting a word of caution out there to our viewers about how to navigate the social media spaces where there's just so much information. So to wrap up, in South Africa, we have formal registration bodies for social workers and for psychologists, clinical counselors, and psychiatrists. And those are the qualifications that are the ones best suited to deal with mental health issues. There's a place for your wellness coaches, your life skills coaches, but when you're moving more towards major behavior change, major behavioral issues, mental health issues, you need to then go see the people who have the qualifications and the experience, and are also being monitored and supervised and held accountable for their practice. And that's just, I think, our closing recommendations. Nafta, do you have anything to add to that before we wrap up?
That is it. My message is basically just, watch everything, look at everything, but hold what is good and what works for you and what you know is regulated and supervised.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope today's session was informative, and we'll see you again in the next Tough Talks. Thank you.
Thank you.